Hey everyone, Marvin here, and welcome back to Buddy Up Gaming. Terra Invicta is a deep, demanding 4X strategy game built around a fascinating question. How would humanity respond to the discovery of a hostile, technologically superior alien force? It's an incredibly complex game, but once you begin to understand how its systems fit together, the way they interlock becomes absolutely gripping. In our Jupiter Rush series, we've covered in full detail the optimal strategy for gaining an early edge against the true Goliath of this game, the aliens. With our guide concluding in the previous segment, I thought it would be fitting to showcase the playthroughs I used to create this series. I'll highlight the lessons I learned across these runs and share some of my favorite moments from putting this guide together. Before we dive into the playthroughs, I want to walk through several examples of how to assess a start for its potential to support a Jupiter Rush strategy. In each example, we'll cover 4 areas. First, we'll examine the stats and traits of our starting councilors, along with those available in the recruitment pool. Next, we'll check global public opinion, specifically in the USA and China. Third, we'll run the Reveal Sites console command and assess the mining sites on the moon. Finally, we'll take a quick look at the intel panel to identify the strongest sites for each space resource. For my first 2026 run, I evaluated around 10 starts and came away with 4 viable options. What I love about these 4 is how clearly they showcase the breadth of starting conditions you might encounter, and how each one can offer a viable path to a successful Jupiter Rush. The first option featured the best councilor I've ever rolled for controlling the USA. Darby starts with 8 base persuasion, comes with the family ties and media darling traits, and is just 2 experience points away from gaining National Hero. After 1 successful mission to secure that trait, Darby can run Control Nation missions in the USA with an effective 15 persuasion. Absolutely incredible. This start also featured the most impressive fissile asteroid I've ever seen, with a juicy 49.3 yield. Mining that asteroid would be fantastic for the late game, though there's always a strong chance the aliens will settle it first during their initial push into the belt. The second option featured perhaps the most unique activist I've ever encountered. 8 base persuasion with media darling isn't rare, but finding the social scientist trait on an activist is extremely uncommon. This start also rolled an absolute banger moon, strong enough that I could skip mining Mars entirely. The only drawback was needing 5 outposts to capture all those resources, which is really only feasible in a 2026 start thanks to the USA's higher boost income. The third option featured a solid activist. 7 base persuasion with opinion leader and national hero is nothing to dismiss. More importantly, the recruitment pool included a 9 persuasion celebrity and a 7 persuasion evangelist with Firebrand. My faction also started with 15% public opinion in the USA. Altogether, this meant I could secure Canada and Mexico more quickly and grab US control points in pairs. The final option had arguably the weakest starting activist. 8 base persuasion with media darling is great, but pariah is painful. Not only does it penalize persuasion missions, it blocks access to national hero. However, the recruitment pool was excellent. I found a scientist with astronomer and a criminal evangelist who could equip cheaper administration orgs later in the run. Even better, my faction started with 17% public opinion in the USA and 21% in China, an absurd spread that's realistically only possible with the Academy. The moon was serviceable, though nothing special. Ultimately, I chose this final option for my first 2026 attempt. Compared to the 2022 starts, the biggest challenge in 2026 is the USA's lower starting research. My plan was to leverage the high public opinion to secure the USA earlier and get a head start on required techs, while also tapping into China sooner to boost overall science output. The moon wasn't ideal, but the higher boost income in 2026 helped offset that weakness. I used 4 playthroughs to build this series. First, a 2022 start as the Resistance on normal difficulty using the RC1 patch. Second, a 2022 start as the Academy on brutal difficulty using the RC13A patch. Third, a 2026 start as Humanity First on patch 1.0.26. And fourth, a 2026 start as the Academy on brutal on 1.0.28. The biggest piece of advice I can offer from these runs is simple. If you're new to Jupiter Rush or Terra Invicta in general, expect to make mistakes. Honestly, that advice applies to most games. Making mistakes can be frustrating, but learning from them and improving is incredibly empowering. That's a huge part of why I love games like this. Find 3 solid starting options. Treat your first run as practice. Work off the rust, learn what works, and adjust. Use your second run to refine your approach. Some changes will work beautifully, others will force you to adapt again. Then let your third run be your pièce de résistance. Crank it to brutal, add that extra alien fleet, and test your limits. The tougher the challenge, the sweeter the victory. The early game primarily revolves around one overarching goal: completing the research required to send a colony ship to Jupiter before the aliens establish an unbreakable foothold. That race begins on turn 1, with securing control of the USA as quickly as possible. While you should absolutely make sure your starting conditions include councilors optimized for this task, you're still going to rely on a bit of luck. Even when there are plenty of viable nations to target, I've lost control points in Canada and Mexico, which forced me to invest more heavily in public opinion within the United States just to achieve reasonable odds on control nation missions. Once you've secured the US, don't hesitate to resign your initial activists if stronger councilors appear in the recruitment pool. I'll often replace them with someone who has the social scientist or astronomer trait, or fill in a missing archetype, such as a high investigation counselor. From there, the pressure intensifies with the need to maintain control over global research priorities. It's not enough to simply contribute the most research so you can select the next technology. Ideally, rival factions should also contribute meaningfully so that key global technologies complete faster. It's incredibly frustrating when you're the only faction investing in something massive like industrialization of space. On the other hand, fully committing all your research just to avoid losing priority control can be just as aggravating. Whether these extreme situations occur often comes down to luck. My best advice is that after completing advanced chemical rocketry, mission to Mars, and arrival domestic politics, you should prioritize space mining and refining. That allows you to dedicate 2 of 3 global research tracks to mission to the asteroids and industrialization of space. This setup pressures rival factions to contribute to high priority technologies, and the sheer cost of those projects reduces the likelihood that you'll lose out as the top contributing faction. As for colony ship drives, I strongly recommend the grid drive on the current 1.0.29 patch. That recommendation largely reflects the mining sites typically generated on Luna. In earlier versions, it wasn't uncommon for Luna to produce over 10 fissils per month. Now, you're fortunate to see 4. Additionally, unlocking the compact solid fission core projects in a timely fashion often requires excessive save scumming. When you finally arrive at Jupiter, your attention shifts towards expanding your mining network and protecting your holdings, both in space and on Earth. Establishing a reliable defense is your top priority. There's nothing quite as humbling as underestimating how many missile boats you need and watching an alien fleet shrug off your attack. That said, you want to minimize early defensive investment so you can commit more resources to expansion. The typical design for early defense ships involves maximizing frontal armor, adding some side and rear protection in case of flanking, and installing a heatsink so radiators can be retracted during combat. I demonstrated this approach in my first 2 runs. By my final run, however, I abandoned many of those precautions. Early alien ships tend to stick to their initial trajectory and fire lasers or plasma straight ahead, meaning all incoming damage is absorbed by frontal armor. Later ships may attempt to flank, but missiles often eliminate them before they can inflict meaningful harm. As of this video's release, auto-resolve can also be leveraged effectively. Combat calculations seem to heavily prioritize weapon payload and largely discount maneuverability. I've frequently clicked auto-resolve once my missiles were in flight and enemy missiles were cleared, and the results consistently assumed my payload would land before my ships took damage. With that in mind, I began skipping side and rear armor entirely. After researching advanced heat management concepts, I upgraded to stronger radiators, then left them extended during combat. This allowed me to replace the heatsink with an additional magazine, increasing offensive output and reducing the number of ships required for defense. In terms of mining expansion, my later runs were far more aggressive. After allocating initial mission control to defense fleets and LEO orbitals, I began claiming nearly every strong mining site in Jupiter and the asteroid belt. This strategy consumes an enormous amount of mission control, so your nations must contribute earlier. In my earlier runs, I kept the USA focused on knowledge until education reached 12, only briefly switching to raise my MC cap into the 30 to 40 range needed for early Jupiter operations. In later runs, I pivoted the USA toward mission control much earlier and even added pips in China. While this shift reduced mid-game research output from my nations, it's a worthwhile trade-off. Unlike the early game, you're not racing to complete any single critical technology. A month or 2 of delay won't lose the campaign. Accelerating resource generation instead positions you to blanket LEO with research campuses and later research universities. Shifting research output from control points to space modules is especially powerful in 2026 starts, where low cohesion and government scores can severely limit control point research unless you heavily invest in reducing inequality. Once you're firmly established across Jupiter and the asteroid belt with Tier 2 infrastructure, the next major hurdle comes when you go on the offensive. Taking the fight to alien strongholds can be risky. Even asteroid belt targets may require months of travel, so you must bring sufficient missile monitors to handle any defensive fleets at your destination. You'll typically need at least 10 monitors to reliably eliminate fully developed alien stations. The final gauntlet is designing an offensive fleet capable of striking the alien homeworld in the Kuiper Belt. In a standard campaign, you might wait to research endgame technologies and deploy overpowered lancers and dreadnoughts. But in keeping with the rush philosophy, I prefer deploying medium-sized ships earlier to maintain pressure. That requires careful design choices. In my first runs, I relied on balanced battleships equipped with ultraviolet arc lasers and advanced coil guns. They performed well in evenly matched engagements. However, against overwhelming alien point defense, coil gun projectiles often failed to connect. That experience led me to switch to battlecruisers in my final run, and for this guide. Battlecruisers can mount a 3-point laser cannon instead of the 2-point variants available to battleships, significantly increasing damage output at both close and long range. As mentioned earlier, the 2026 start presents unique challenges compared to 2022. Lower US research output leaves far less margin for error in completing the technologies needed to reach Jupiter on schedule. Rival factions can dramatically affect your timeline, depending on how they handle global research priorities. Sometimes they cooperate and contribute meaningfully, accelerating progress. Other times, they ignore global research entirely in favor of faction projects. and occasionally they double down on a single global priority, forcing you to match their investment just to maintain control. I experienced this repeatedly during my Humanity First run, which delayed key milestones significantly. By the time my colony ship arrived at Jupiter, the aliens were entrenched and immediately expelled me. While bad luck certainly contributed, faction choice also mattered. Humanity First is arguably the most difficult faction for Jupiter Rush because it lacks access to some of the strongest councilor organization, which slows early development. My Academy run on a brutal 2026 start fared much better. It's my favorite faction to play for a Jupiter Rush strategy because their high starting global public opinion significantly reduces the difficulty of securing control of the USA. In this run, I managed to roll 3 outstanding high persuasion councilors, which allowed me to grab every control point in Canada and Mexico. With a strong neighboring nation bonus and excellent public opinion, I gained full control of the USA by turn 6. The Academy's other major strength is its low ideological difference with rival factions, which reduces the difficulty of running turn councilor missions. Penetrating rival factions early and stealing their high-quality orgs allowed me to ramp up my CP cap much more quickly. As a result, I trained an exceptionally high persuasion councilor early in the run. With a steady stream of public campaigns, I secured my first control point in China by the end of the year, a full 3 months earlier than in my Humanity First playthrough. Luck also favored me in space expansion. I drew a moon with strong water yields, and Mars featured 3 mining sites with excellent volatile or base metal output. In general, I was considerably more aggressive with expansion in this run, even sending probes and establishing outposts on high-yield asteroid sites before my colony ship arrived at Jupiter. Funding that aggressive expansion significantly altered my Earth-side strategy. Normally, I attempt to fully conquer the EU once I've raised my CP cap sufficiently through projects and admin nodes. However, because I was spending heavily to support my expanded mining network, I instead focused on holding high-yield spoil nations to generate the necessary cash flow. In fact, I did not fully capture the EU until 6 years into the run, and it took another year to completely expand the Federation. My journey to Jupiter was nerve-wracking. The aliens settled their first Jovian outpost just 14 months into the run and had constructed several more by the time my colony ship arrived in September of 2028. While I was able to remove most of those outposts using early Marine ships, the final one wasn't raised until after I researched the Elite Marines project. Even more maddening were the 2 alien space stations in the system. One was destroyed quickly while it was still upgrading, but the second completed a battle station before I could field my initial defense fleet. I tried countless early game ship combinations to take out that station, and every attempt failed. Ultimately, I had to play the long game and return a year later with monitors strong enough to destroy it. Of course, Jupiter wasn't the only source of alien frustration. With the new option to add an early invasion fleet, fending off 6 alien armies just a year into the game is a serious nuisance. Fortunately, luck favored me again. The aliens selected 3 landing sites that were accessible by my US armies, allowing me to establish control before alien landfall. Otherwise, eliminating the alien presence proceeded as usual. I rushed alien containment so I could detain a Hydra with a relatively low security stat, and I eliminated the final alien agent in August of 2031. Whenever additional alien transports were sent toward Earth, I ensured my defense fleet was large enough that I could choose to sacrifice a few ships to destroy them before they could land. After completing Advanced Missile Warfare Doctrine and upgrading my missile boats, I began assembly fleets to eliminate alien strongholds in the asteroid belt and Saturn. I dedicated 1 fleet to the asteroid belt, launching it at the end of 2032 and cycling through all alien outposts in the region. A second fleet departed for Saturn in 2033, cleared the system of outposts and stations, and then proceeded toward Uranus in 2035. At this stage, I needed Tier 3 space infrastructure to support endgame fleets targeting Neptune and the Kuiper Belt. Normally, I don't pursue Tier 3 colonies, but because one of the Academy's victory requirements is to establish fully developed Tier 3 colonies on multiple planetary bodies, I committed to both upgrade paths. I began building outpost upgrades in August 2032 and station upgrades in December. This was my first playthrough where I fully dedicated LEO stations to research universities, and it absolutely paid off in the long run. By securing strong fissile sites in the asteroid belt early in the campaign, I was able to fuel 2 endgame fleets, one targeting Neptune and the other striking the alien home base in the Kuiper Belt. By this point, the total alien navy numbered fewer than 60 ships, which is honestly pretty pitiful. Destroying their remaining ships was relatively straightforward, but eliminating their space stations proved more difficult. It's not immediately obvious from their descriptions, but upgrading from point defense arc laser turrets to point defense phaser turrets makes a massive difference when defending against alien magnetic spam. Another frustration was the alien tendency to settle additional outposts in the Kuiper Belt, requiring my fleet to refuel and undertake additional long-distance cleanup missions. By 2037, I had completed my Earth-side victory conditions and destroyed all required enemy space infrastructure, except for what remained on Neptune and in the Kuiper Belt. Actually, there was also one random Tier 3 servant outpost lingering in the asteroid belt. Ironically, one of my biggest surprises in this playthrough was how much more adaptable rival factions became in the endgame. While their ship designs still left much to be desired, the servants managed to assemble a respectable navy and even launched a fleet targeting my holdings in Jupiter. On Earth, they repeatedly ran Steel Project missions against my councilors. Because I had neglected to invest in their security stats, these missions often resulted in critical success, allowing rival factions to steal research and temporarily wrest control of global research priorities. At that stage of the game, losing control wasn't catastrophic, and in a strange twist, the additional science rival factions gained from these missions actually helped me complete certain endgame milestones a little faster. In the end, I completed all remaining victory conditions and executed the final mission in July of 2038. The multi-pronged offensive across the outer planets dramatically reduced the time required to eliminate all Tier 3 alien infrastructure. In fact, the campaign concluded so efficiently that I didn't even have enough time to complete the Protium Converter Torch project or pursue any future tech. I hope you enjoyed this final video, highlighting the key lessons I learned from playing the Jupiter Rush strategy in Terra Invicta. I truly can't express how impressive this game is, not only in the depth and interconnectivity of its systems, but in the way its narrative captures the full spectrum of human psychology when confronted with a paradigm-shifting event like First Contact. Most of all, learning to adapt to the stiff challenge posed by the aliens is exhilarating and deeply fulfilling. That constant process of adapting, refining, and overcoming is exactly what I love most about video games. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to Buddy Up Gaming for more family-friendly reviews, guides, and other gaming content. Take care out there.
There is little we cannot achieve when we put our minds together. A void, once daunting, reduced to a superhighway. A foe, once invincible, has learned to respect us. We stride forward with minds open and hearts full of courage, reaching together towards a unified future. Against all odds, we have done it, Chancellor. The Hydra are speaking to us as equals. Perhaps someday we will speak together as partners.